Olá a todos, mi nombre es Ana María Márquez da Silva, soy profesora de la Universidad de São Paulo, soy física. Quisiera agradecer a los organizadores de la Asociación Latinoamericana de Física Médica por la invitación a esta conferencia para celebrar el Día Internacional de la Física Médica. Para evitar hablar una mezcla de portugués y español, pido permiso para hablar en inglés. So my talk today will be about avoiding mistakes in scientific writing, my own experience, that is, as a Latin America Medical Physics Journal editor. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. I'm a professor at the PhD program in radiology of the School of Medicine of University of São Paulo, and I'm also the executive director of the consulting company Medical Imaging and Data Analytics. So my degree is in physics. I have a master in science education and a PhD in nuclear physics, all at the University of São Paulo, and I made my postdoctoral fellowship at the KU Leuven, that's in Belgium, in quantitative imaging. I have more than almost 30 years of research, teaching, and administrative experience in medical physics in different institutions like the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio Grande do Sul and the Federal University of Santa Maria. And during this period, I was the editor-in-chief of the Brazilian Journal of Medical Physics during almost 10 years. And I am the associate editor of the European Journal of Nuclear Medicine and Molecular Imaging, EJ and MMI Physics, since 2019. So to this experience, I would like to talk with you about this really hard path to publish a paper, a scientific research paper. This path usually has a lot of enemies or some people that are ready to destroy us in this path, not only the reviewers or the editors, but other people. But usually this path starts a lot before in the preparation of the paper, of this manuscript. And when you are writing a scientific paper, this paper will have, you need to think that this paper will have a crucial impact in your career in academia. And it doesn't matter if you agree or think it's fair or not, all this publish or perish thing. But what is true is that the number of published peer-reviewed papers and citations generally reflect your academic reach. And it's not only in the academia that this is important, but in companies or in hospitals. When you publish scientific research papers, you add value to your educational background. And if you're applying for a job, your application will stand out for the job recruiters. And actually, it will instill confidence in the recruiters because it will be a proof of your knowledge and your experience. And why is that? Because the scientific paper is one of the most challenging types of writing. So to create and to publish a scientific paper, you need to be very committed. And you need to use your research skills like these ones. And these research skills have a lot of aspects, like you need to know how to formulate questions and to observe, to plan, to collect data, to record data, to organize them, to interpret them, and always to make some kind of presentation. So in some sense, when you publish a paper, this proves that you have read many scientific papers and you know at least how to argue about your ideas in a very specific way. And that, of course, you have a very critical perspective. But there are some mistakes that we do when we are in this path. And my role here today is to talk to you about some classes of mistakes that I would like to help you to avoid. A mistake is something that we do because we have a lack of experience. And so let's try to help. I would like to help you to avoid these mistakes. So there are 4 classes of mistakes when you are trying to publish a scientific research paper. I will detail these 4 classes. So the first one are mistakes related to research paper, mistakes that are related to the journal selection, some mistakes of formatting, and some ethical challenges. Let's start with the research paper. So when we think about a scientific research, what we are thinking about? So the definition of scientific research is this kind of systematic collection, analysis, and interpretation of data to answer a particular question or to solve a specific problem. So when you are doing scientific research, you need to observe, to describe, to explain, to make predictions, to improve processes or devices, and to share your findings. This meaning you need to publish. And when you publish a scientific paper, a scientific paper usually has sections. And these sections are shown in this figure, has different parts, and I will talk a little bit about each part. So you have the title, the abstract and keywords, the introduction, materials and methods, the results, the discussion, the conclusions, the acknowledgement, and the references. Let's talk about what are the mistakes and what you should and what you should not do when you're starting to write the title of your paper. The title needs to describe the main message of the article. So, and you need to remember that the title of the paper is the first thing that the editor will see when you submit the paper. So it can affect really not only the journal editor, but the impression of the journal reviewers of the importance of the paper. This title needs to be short enough. What means short enough? The fewest possible words. There are some guidelines, but usually they say that the maximum length of the title should be of 20 words. But it needs to be very concise, to be specific, informative of the content, and to be a very accurate sentence. So what you should not do, so don't do a very long and general title. So don't do titles where you have jargons, slangs, puns, or idiomatic expressions. So don't do this type of examples here that I show you, because usually when this arrives to the editor, they will reject the paper immediately. So, and remember to don't include unknown abbreviations. Then you have the abstract and the keywords. And the abstract is really the most essential section and communicates the primary paper message. You need to remember that often the readers will only read the title, the abstract, and to decide whether they are going to continue reading. So, and usually the title and the abstract, they are freely available. So the abstracts could be in 2 different there are two different types of abstracts. They can be unstructured or they can be structured in sections. Sometimes they have the background, that's the context, but they have also the purpose or the objective, the methods, the results, and the conclusion. Even if they are not structured in different parts, you need to follow this sequence. And usually they are very limited. So they are between 250 and 300 words, depending on the journal. And they must be very attractive, concise, and clear. And you need to remember that the abstract needs to stand alone. And never write the abstract before you complete the paper. Always do it after the completion. And what you cannot do, what you should not do. So don't miss any sections. Sometimes you don't have space to do the background, but if you need to skip something and to miss some section, don't only cut the background, okay? And never cite references in your abstract, or don't overuse abbreviations. If you are going to use abbreviation, only put the abbreviation in the abstract if you need really to use it in the abstract, okay? And this is the structure that usually an abstract has. So here you have the title, and here's the structure of the abstract. Here, I made the counting. This is 271 words, so it's almost 300. And you have this first part is the part that is the background, where we are contextualizing the problem. Then you have the purpose, the meaning, the aim, the objective needs to be very clear in one sentence. And then you need to describe the methods, the methodology, the materials that you use it in a very short way. And then you need to put the results. And sometimes you put the results and then the conclusions, or you put the results and the conclusion, okay? So you will not make the discussion exactly in the abstract, but you will be very direct. And what about the keywords? Yeah, the keywords are very useful if you are searching for your article. So when you choose the keywords, imagine that you are searching for your article. What are the main words? There are some tips, like to use mesh words this is very standardized vocabulary from NIH, or you can use some words to increase the possibility of finding your article. For example, this article has CT in the title, and you can put as a keyword computed tomography. That is the same, but then you can find them because you have these two options. Or you can use, for example, here there is texture descriptors, or you can put texture features and so on. So this is when we are choosing the keywords. But they are these main words that are necessary to find your article. What about the introduction? That's the next section. So the introduction is the summary of the current knowledge about that topic. So it will provide all the context and the rationale of your study. It's really a part where you will introduce the importance of your work and why it's so important to have this paper. So a good introduction needs to have the significance of the topic. What's the gap between the literature and your proposal? It needs to have a really brief literature review in support to the key questions of your problem. And you need to have the purpose, the objective, very clearly stated. So it's not very big in the paper, so it needs to be brief. it needs to be something interesting. It should be written in present tense, okay? And you need to present the objective of your word in the last paragraph. And it's usually the objective and then how you did it. So what was a summary about how do you explore this objective? What you should not do, don't make an exhaustive revision on the topic. Sometimes you can have an additional section called a review or bibliographic review, or you can, and then you can have a more exhaustive review of the topic, but not in the introduction. The introduction, you will have a lot of references, but you will only make a short, a brief revision of the literature. And don't miss relevant references about your topic. Okay. What's the next session in a research paper? Is what we call materials and methods. Sometimes call it methodology. And what is this part? Is where you explain how you design your investigation and what are the procedures that you use it to explore your hypothesis, your problem. So when we talk about materials and methods, what are the differences? Materials will be when you describe the instrumental design. So you will need to talk about the tools that you use it, in a sense that someone could read it and can reproduce it. And the methods part will describe the procedures. So how you did it. So the main questions that you need to answer in this section of materials and methods is: who did it? What? When? Where? How? And why? So you need to describe, for example, your population, your variables, your protocols, how you did your statistical analysis, and how do you justify this statistical analysis. And sometimes if you're using, especially in medical journals, you need to describe the inclusion and exclusion criteria. And usually it's organized in subsections. So always you should justify the assumptions that you did and give very detailed information. And it should be written in the past tense, not in the present, as in the introduction. And you must include the statistical analysis. That is the last subsection, as I said. What you should not do: don't explain a method that was previously published. So if you are going to use a method that was already published, cite the method. So make the citation. And don't use small or biased samples. So you need to be very careful about your samples. And don't justify the procedures. The justification of the procedures will be done in the discussion session. What about the results? That's the next session. The next session is the results section is where you summarize and you illustrate the findings. It needs to be done in very orderly, in a logical sequence. And usually, if you only have results, you need to do it without making any interpretation. The information may be in different forms like tables and graphs, especially when you have a lot of data or complicated data sets. Then it's better if you use a table to summarize. And the graphs and figures, they are used when you want to show trends, patterns, or you want to show relationships between two variables, for example. Remember that in the results and always in the paper, you need to put legends or captions, and they must be used to describe tables and figures, and they need to be very complete, meaning that if I have a figure or a graph, the legend will be enough to make all the interpretation. Okay? What I should do in the results, always mention a graph or a table in the text before the figure or the table appears. Always mention. And have a textual presentation of the key findings always after the graph and the tables. Don't leave the graph or the tables alone. Always make an explanation about what you want to highlight in that figure or table. What you should not do, don't describe again the methods, because you already explained it in the previous section. And never include both a table and a graph showing the same information, okay? And what about the discussion? Well, sometimes the discussion is a separate section. Sometimes it's combined with the results section. Sometimes it's results and discussion. So I would like to explain when the discussion is separated. When it's separated, you need to open explaining what the study shows without including any references, okay? And then you need to critically evaluate your work. And how do you do that? You compare, you contrast your results with other authors, other published papers. So highlight the findings' importance, the relevance for the field, and how your paper is original and your results are original. But always describe the limitations and strengths of your work. In the end, the final answer to the study main question is done, and then you can describe the implications. This last part, sometimes is in the conclusion, but sometimes the conclusion doesn't exist, or it's only final remarks, and sometimes you don't have even conclusion, and then you need to put it in the discussion, okay? So what about what you need to do, what you don't, what you should do, what you should not? Well, you should use always the past tense to discuss your study, your results, but use the present tense to discuss other studies. And please be very diplomatic when you are explaining contradictions, when you don't agree with another publication. Don't be rude. So this is quite important. This is one of the main reasons some papers are rejected. And in this section, always make some suggestions for future work, what you need to do, or what are the further studies that you are developing. What you should not do not describe the results again, okay? You have already done that. And never show the results that were not presented. So never discuss something that you didn't present in the result. And never hide unexpected results. So if you have unexpected results, discuss them, okay? And don't overstress the meaning of your findings, or meaning that don't exaggerate in your findings, okay? And then the conclusion of the paper. The conclusion sometimes, as I said, is combined with the discussion, sometimes separated. But if you have a separate discussion, what do you need to put? It's very short, usually the discussion, the conclusion. So you will need to put 4 things: the key findings, the importance of your results, the impact in future directions, okay? So the conclusions is where you answer your main question. And then you include the theoretical and practical implications. And it must be based on the results, but don't repeat the results, okay? And you need to explain the discrepancies and the unexpected findings. So state the importance, state the impact of your discoveries, and give future directions. So make strong statements. Don't use, it may be concluded, use concluding, so be very straight, very strong, and present it in a very consistent, focused way. And as I said, include these 4 topics. What you should not do in the conclusion, don't repeat the results. Don't give general conclusions. So be very specific and include conclusions that the results, don't include conclusions where the results that you have cannot be justified, okay? It seems that the paper, all the sections ended, but we have some other sections, and I would like to give you some tips and about how to avoid some mistakes in these sections. For example, the acknowledgement. So this is where you disclose people and institutions that contribute directly to your work. But you never, in the acknowledgement, thank people or institutions of the authors. So is where you disclose it, people besides the authors. So for example, if you have technical help, or if you have a source of a special equipment, a special lab, and this is not an author, and then this is the place where you will thank. And this is especially important, disclosure all your financial assistance like all your funds, like grants, contracts, and fellowships, okay? And what you should do, you should be very concise, you should be relevant, you should only include people and institutions other than the authors. You need to cite the grants, all the additional financial support, and always show the words of the acknowledgements for those who already thank. So show them these words to the people who helped you. Okay, this is quite important. And what you should not do, never use the expression, I wish to thank, go straight. Thanks the lab, thank, something like this. And never use vague language without specifying the type of help. So if you want to thank someone or an institution, say why you are thanking this institution or people. And never, not in a research paper, thank your family, friends, or write personal stories, okay? And then the references. So you need to remember that the references have some citation style, and this citation style depends on the journal. So each journal will choose a type of style. For example, the medical journals usually they use Vancouver citation style. But what's most important is that you need to review and update your references. So use the most recent literature. It's not very good if you have a paper that all the references are more than 5 years older. So only include papers that are already published. Imagine that it was accepted by a publication, and then it will have a DOI, so it will have a number, or it will have a reference, or it will have a preprint server or a repository. So only include this type of papers. And if you are going to have more than 5 authors, always include only the first author's name and then followed by et al. Remember that you should cite all the references that are used in the text. So if you make a reference in the text, it must be in the reference list. Remember to cite more primary sources than review papers. This is quite important. And inform always if the reference is in press or if it's already published, you have all the reference. What you should not do is do not include a reference that's not cited in the text. And do not rely heavily on 1 or 2 sources. And this is quite important. Don't use too many self-referring papers, okay? So this is the mistakes that you need to avoid and what you need to do related to the research paper writing. And then you have the other classes that you need to see. For example, the journal selection. How do you select a journal? Well, first of all, consider your article type, if it's an original research or it's a review or a case report or a protocol. So see what's the type of the article and find a journal that can publish this type of article and the specialty of this journal. And how do you know? Well, you can read the journal's aim and scope, and then you can make sure that it will be a match. But this journal selection is really a long path. So you need to develop a kind of a strategy. So you need try to consult your collaborators, like your supervisor or your colleagues that have already published some papers. Review the journal scope, as I said, and see if the scope of the journal is the same that you would like to do. And then stay organized, meaning that you need to make maybe a table, and within this table, you will put the journals and all the information. Which kind of information is important? For example, the journal's impact. So you have several metrics to understand what's the best journal, like the site score, like the SJIR, the JIPF. So there are several metrics. And then you need to understand the peer review process. What's the timeline? How long it's going to take? So, and check the publication fees. Check if your institution has an agreement and how you will be able to, if you will be able to request a fee, waive the fee or not, and how is the accessibility, if it's an open access or not. And organize all of this in a table. And then if you still have some doubts about how to select the journal, several publishers, they have journal searchers. And for example, Wiley, they have several journals that are published by Wiley. So you can put your manuscript title and then you can put the abstract. And then they have a machine to identify the best journals, the journals that match with your title and your abstract. And it's the same for Elsevier and even EndNote, Clarivate. They have a manuscript matcher that will match your title and abstract with the right journal. So these are different ways to find the best journal. What are other mistakes that you need to avoid? Formatting. So formatting is something that's interesting because it seems that it's easy, but a lot of people do this type of mistakes. So usually academic journals, they have instructions. They have checklists, they have templates for the authors. This is always in the web page. In the medical physics, you will find it in the contribute author guideline. In the Journal of Health and Medical, you will have a section that will be instruction for the authors. In the Brazilian Journal of Medical Physics, you will have submissions, and then you have the how to prepare your manuscript. So read carefully these instructions, okay? And as I said before, when you read these instructions, you have the citation style, for example. And this is one of the mistakes, maybe the most frequent mistake. So imagine that the journal has a citation style, for example, Vancouver, and you chose one, you send your paper with another citation style. If the editor of the reviewers, they receive it, and they receive your paper with the wrong format of the citations, this will show a lack of attention. Or worse, this means that maybe you submitted the paper to another journal and you forgot, and it was rejected, and you only put it in another journal. So this is very bad, okay? So what about the citation styles? There are different styles, and your journal will declare explicitly which style they use. Okay, the Vancouver is the one that you have the reference that are numbered in the text. They are listed in numerical order when they are appearing. If the same reference appears again, it will have the same number. And then it can be in line within brackets, or it can be superscript. So you need really to pay attention. This is the Vancouver style. The MLA and the MAPA, they use the author's last name and the page number, the MLA, and then in the reference, they will not have numbers. They will be listed in alphabetical order of the last name of the first author. And the APA, it will use only the last name in year of publication. And then the references are also listed in the alphabetic order. The Vancouver style is the most frequent in the medical physics journals. What you should do, you need to check, even if you know the style, you need to check the names and the dates of all references. And if you have the digital object identifier, that's the DOI, that's the unique number of one article, provided in your reference, because usually this will be used for the citation score of the article. So it's quite important to have this digital object identifier number, okay? What you should not do, don't miscode a citation. So be very careful with the spelling of the names, with the dates, with the information of the volume, the issue, everything. And one thing that I learned with the years is that don't trust any citation software like EndNote, Zotero, Mendeley, or something like this, because usually they have errors. So they don't have the full information. So you need to review. Even if you use, for example, EndNote for citations, always review it, and always review if they have all the information. If you don't find it, and then you need to make a search for the right information, okay? About the formatting, one thing that is quite important is the plagiarism, okay? What is plagiarism? It's the unethical practice use of words, of ideas of another author, or your own previous works without proper acknowledgement. And this can be planned, but this sometimes is not. Sometimes you are writing and then you don't remember from where these ideas came from, and you forget to cite it. So this is very dangerous because it can result in a highly negative consequence. This meaning that if you copy, for example, one part of a paper and don't cite it, if the author discovers, and then sometimes you need to retract your article. And this will affect your credibility and you will lose your reputation. So it's quite important. So always cite words, idea, phrases that are taken from another paper. We have software to analyze if you make it or not. So all the publishers, they can test the similarity, what we call the similarity, overall similarity. But it's quite important that you be aware of it. So how do I do if the idea of the author is very good and I would like to write it down in my paper? So restate the author's ideas, use your own words, but still cite the original work. So if you want to copy and paste, then use quotes, okay? And use this kind of plagiarism checkers. There are some of them that are free, and some of them are paid versions. And usually some of them are used by institutions. So in your library, you can find, for example, some of these plagiarism checkers. And they will give you this kind of report. This is a report of the Turnitin, that is one of the plagiarism checkers. They will give you the percentage of how your papers is similar to others. And they will give even the place where they find the similarity. And this is a very high number. So never produce a paper with more than 50% of overall similarity. So you can test yours and then you can rewrite your paper, okay? So do not copy and paste the text from the reference without quoting or rephrasing and then citing. And there is something that we call self-plagiarism, that you use material that you have already published, use a text that you have already published. Avoid that. This is really a mistake, okay? And then we have the last class of mistakes to avoid, that are the ethical challenges. And there are ethical challenges related with the submission and related to the participants' ethics, okay? I will put them together. So you always need to analyze your data properly, what this means, without conflict of interest. Or if you have personal interests, commercial, political, academic, or even financial interest, try to be very objective in the analysis of your data. Don't put a tendency in your results due to these interests, okay? Always avoid redundant publication. What this means, this is an ethical issue. So if you have 2 or more papers, but you don't have this complete cross-reference, and they share the same hypotheses, data, discussion points, and conclusion, never submit this without disclosing this question, why they were published, they need to be published. Sometimes, for example, you have an abstract that was published in a conference proceedings. It was smaller, you want to increase and then to publish in a journal. So you need to be sure that you are going to disclosure that it was already approved and published as an abstract or a shorter paper, and then it's going to be published in a journal, okay? So always make this full disclosure about it. Otherwise, this is a redundant publication, okay? And then if the papers are exactly the same, you will need to retract one, okay? Another question is the participant's ethic. So if your study involves people, medical records, even if they are anonymized, if they are images that are anonymized or human tissues, is essential to obtain the approval of the ethical committee. The institution, sometimes you have the institution ethical committee, and then you have something like the local ethical institute. But it's really important to have the ethical approval for this situation. Unless it's a very public repository of data, if you have acquired the data, even if you anonymize, you will need to have the approval of the ethics committee. And when you are making the submission, always disclosure your conflict of interest. For example, you are making the analysis of the performance of a scanner, and you are the employee of the company. So you need to disclosure that you have this conflict of interest, okay? You are an employee of a pharmaceutical company and you are publishing the evaluation of the pharmaceutical performance, you will need to disclosure. Always use appropriate statistical analysis, meaning that if you are analyzing the data, don't underreport or omit negative research findings. That's what I mean, appropriate statistical analysis, okay? And as I said before, disclosure, if you are standing publication that was already published in proceedings and it's going to be in a journal, and always submit the project to the ethical committees. There are some ethical things that you should not do, like to fabricate, falsify data, or to underreport or omit negative research findings. As I said before, to do redundant publications without disclosing, and to publish before the approval of the ethical committees in the case that you are involving people, medical records, or images. And we have the authorship. The authorship is something very difficult. And usually we have a lot of discussion between the authors when the paper is accepted. Usually sometimes you have some discussion, but you need to define this before when you submit the paper. Why? Because there's no universal definition of authorships. But what's an author? So the authors are those who made substantial contributions, not only for the conception, the design, the data acquisition, the analysis, but also the interpretation. So, and if the person is an author, it always reviewed the paper, drafted the paper, and made some important contributions, and gave the final approval. Never send a paper to a journal without the approval of all the authors, not only to be submitted, not only to be published, but also to be submitted, okay? So this is an ethical challenge because sometimes you have a discussion. And the other discussion is about the sequence. What's the sequence? Who is the first author? Usually the first author is the one that has drafted the paper and it's leading the manuscript. And it wrote the first draft and then reviewed it, put everything together. And so this is the first author. And then the others. So the others will be, or the order will be defined by the relative contribution to the overall, to the manuscript. Okay. The only difference is this: the last author usually is the principal investigation, or the senior author is the last one. Okay, something like the supervisor, if these are students. Who you don't put as authors, don't grant authorship for example, you have a colleague that made a really beautiful illustration, or medical writers that review your paper to see if you didn't make any kind of silly mistake. Or even editors, you have a colleague that's an editor, a very experienced editor, and you show them the paper and they only give you some tips if the manuscript is readable or not, or maybe some suggestions about the writing. So these are the situation where you put in the acknowledgement. Okay, put these people in the acknowledgement. It's better. These are not authors. Okay. And what you should do always is obtain approval of the manuscript, not for submission and then for final approval from every author that's involved. Okay. There are some journals that ask you to give the exact contribution of each author for the manuscript. So that's why you need to put this in some sense. You need to define before you are going to submit who is going to have which contribution. And this sometimes is mandatory for some journals, okay? What you should not do: don't give authorship for someone who did not contribute at all, or even substantially, like a gift authorship that we call. Or don't even exclude authors that really contribute, that we call ghost authorship, that will not be between the authors. So avoid these two mistakes that are very important in the academia mainly. And to finalize my talk, I would like only to remember that mistakes, like any other mistakes in other area, and especially in scientific writing, can happen for various reasons. Sometimes you lack knowledge, so you don't have the knowledge because it's your first paper, or you never had one paper that was approved or even rejected. And sometimes not the mistake is because you are not careful enough. So it's due to carelessness. And sometimes you have poor judgment. So you need sometimes more experience. And then that's why you need to talk it. And then you have your supervisor or other collaborators that are more experienced. So these are the main points that I would like to remember. So be mindful to avoid these mistakes. In the research paper, always give care about grammar, spelling, figures, tables. So don't make this mistake to give little care about this, because they will be the first reason for a rejection, okay? Don't make incomplete descriptions of materials, methods. Don't use inappropriate analysis. Don't make a discussion where you reaffirm the results and you don't talk with other authors. Don't be rude, okay? And don't overinterpret your results. In the journal selections, never send a paper that's not aligned with your topic. Or you want to send a paper to a really high impact journal, be careful. You need a lot of novelty to justify that you are going to send it to this publication. Don't ignore the requisites, the timeline for the submission. For example, there are some journals that you need to send all the text of the manuscripts and then the figures and graphs in separate files. So be very careful with a certain resolution. So you need to be very careful about these requisites. And never, when you receive the review, never ignore the reviewer's comments. Always answer all of them. About the format, one of the main reasons of rejection immediately is when you ignore the paper guidelines and the author instructions. And when you give little care for the citation style, the reference, or when a little bit more dangerous is when you use plagiarism or self-plagiarism. And be careful about the ethical aspects. Never put a publication that use people data without an ethics committee approval, okay? And never include authors who did not contribute or did not agree to the study, to the submission, okay? Never fabricate or underreport negative research findings, and never do redundant publications without disclosure. So this is my final remarks. I hope this talk will help you to be mindful, to avoid this mistake in your next scientific research paper writing, okay? Thank you very much for the invitation, and we will open for questions after the talk. Thank you.